Hello, everybody. It's Monday. It's Yolanda. Welcome back to everybody at the table. I hope you had a good weekend. I've had a restful one until now. Recording this podcast has been funny this week. But listen, I'm going to jump right into it because we were supposed to continue our conversation with my brother Bobby on patriotism. We're going to finish that next week, but I'm going to pause it because I want to talk about free speech. And it's a form of patriotism, right? Because it's a foundational right in this country. And what happened this week with Jimmy Kimmel is concerning to me. If you've been under a rock, which you may have been because a lot of people are tired of this stuff, you may or may not know that Jimmy Kimmel, who is a late night host on ABC, was suspended. The reason he was suspended is because he was said to have made derogatory comments about Charlie Kirk, the young man who was murdered a couple of weeks ago. Now, I'm not going to make this about Charlie Kirk because I have opinions about that. I'm going to keep them to myself, and that's not the point of this podcast. But free speech is, because Mr. Kimmel's statement, in my estimation in reviewing it, was really not about Mr. Kirk. It was about the MAGA fraction of the Republican Party, and it was about Donald Trump himself. And it is said that Brendan Carr, who was the head of the FCC, was so upset about what Mr. Kimmel said that he used his governmental influence to weigh in and cause this reaction. Now, why is this concerning and why should this be concerning to all of us? Because free speech is a fundamental right guaranteed to each of us by the Constitution. Now, before we talk about that, I want to listen to Mona Kassar Abdi explain to us exactly what happened. I am not a journalism professional. She is a very experienced journalist who is going to explain in her video exactly what happened. It's a lot to follow, but I need us to tap in, tune in, because we need to be clearly aware of what's going on. Listen to this.
In order to understand the Jimmy Kimmel situation, you need to understand how television works, particularly local television. In your hometown, you probably have an ABC station, an NBC station, a CBS station, Fox station. Now, unless you live in big cities like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, these stations are affiliate stations. That means they're owned by a company that's not ABC, NBC, CBS, etc., but either a company that owns 2 or 3 stations or by a station group, like Sinclair Broadcasting, Tegna, Nexstar. Then there are what's called O&Os, which are owned and operated stations. For example, the ABC station in New York is owned and operated by ABC News. Same thing with ABC7 in Los Angeles, it's owned by ABC News Disney. It is rare these days that a station will be owned by a small company. That's because around 10, 15 years ago, station groups, namely Sinclair, started buying up a bunch of local stations all around the country. NBC affiliates, ABC affiliates, it didn't matter. And particularly they focused on small and mid-sized markets. Now this was a strategic move because if you own what the majority of the country, these small local news stations that people in these small towns still watch, then you get to influence what they see. And Sinclair is conservative. It's evident in their content. Now, I used to work for Sinclair back in the day after they bought the station that I was working at. And they used to have these things called must runs, which means no matter where in the country, if you're a Sinclair station, you must put these specific stories in your rundown, aka the news of the day that you're broadcasting. And that's when late night talk shows started making fun of the fact that anchors around the country were saying verbatim the same thing.
Sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media
Now, this is important because affiliates make a deal with the network that they will broadcast their programming in their market and in exchange for example, content. So like ABC News will give ABC affiliates access to their video, and affiliates will give ABC News access to their video. So it's a matter of sharing the resources. So what happened with Jimmy Kimmel is 2 of the nation's biggest broadcast groups, Nexstar and Sinclair, basically told ABC, we're not gonna show Jimmy Kimmel in our markets, and they got a bunch of markets, if you don't rectify the situation. And I should mention that right now, currently, Nexstar is trying to buy one of the other big station groups, Tegna, which owns stations in Dallas and Atlanta, which now are getting into top 10 big city markets. So you see, in a time where viewership is declining, ABC can't really afford to piss off two of the big broadcast groups. Now, if that deal goes through, that means Nexstar will own 265 stations in 44 states and DC, which also Sinclair has a station in DC, the ABC station. That represents 80% of US households. Right now, Nexstar owns 32 ABC stations. Now, both Nexstar and Sinclair have been trying to proposition the FCC to relax regulations on the number of stations they can buy, because if it's up to them, they would buy more. And local news is some of the cheapest programming to produce. So if a station doesn't want to buy a syndicated show, they just throw on another local news show, 4 p.m., 5 p.m., 6 p.m. And when budgets are being slashed and in small towns where they just can't produce that much content, you get this much local news and then it is packed with something that comes from the headquarters. Anyways, I just wanted to add context.
Now, here's what's concerning. Again, Mr. Carr, who is the head of the FCC, is said to have asked or put pressure on the Sinclair organization, which is a large conglomerate of ABC stations, that then put pressure on the ABC Corporation to act against Jimmy Kimmel. While that's a long line to follow, it's important for us to follow that. Because as an independent entity, ABC Corporation has every right to work with Mr. Kimmel in his contract, suspend him if he made defamatory comments, which I don't think he did. One of the things we have to remember about comedy in this country is it's always been used as a satirical tool to bring heavy topics to light. Mr. Kimmel did just that, as he has always done. Nothing derogatory was stated. However, even if the ABC Corporation and Mr. Kimmel disagreed on that, they had every right to act. The problem is that the federal government should not be involved. The federal government is supposed to uphold the Constitution of the United States. They should not be silencing voices. And we all know it to be true because we have seen it happen since Mr. Trump entered the political realm. Now, what can we do about that? What others have been doing about it is boycotting. There has been a vast reaction of people who are boycotting ABC, the Disney Corporation, which is a part of ABC, Hulu, ABC Streaming. I've heard reports of people canceling cruises and trips and all kinds of things in response to ABC. Now, I personally canceled my subscription to Disney. I don't even know I had it. I believe it was my daughter's, but it was still on my account. I canceled it because as a matter of principle, I'm boycotting all ABC because I believe every voice belongs at the table and we should not be punished when we use our voices, especially to stand up against tyranny. Now, I want to be clear. Free speech does not mean free from consequence. Again, private companies have every right to respond to speech made by people under their contract. But there is a huge difference between a corporation making a decision and the government using its authority to pressure that corporation. So here's what I want to leave you with. We must stay informed. I know Black women, we resting, but stay informed. Know who is in power and what they are doing with their power. We must consider our own choices. You decide how you want to move or how you want to support or not support, but you need to consider that. And then remember that protest, resistance, criticism, these are fundamental to our democratic fabric. Sometimes this gets messy, but it's essential. And you and I cannot bury our head. We need to look up and pay attention. I believe free speech still belongs at the table. If we allow fear and influence and the weaponization of regulatory power to silence our voices, we are eroding the very foundation of this country. And you and I have to do something about it. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts about it. You may not be as long. I would love to hear your thoughts. You may not be as alarmed as I, but I also have a podcast where I speak to power. And I don't want my voice or your voice silenced. Hit the comments. Let's have a conversation as a community. Let's tune in. Until next time, share the podcast with somebody. And take care of yourself. And as always, dine well.